This is the etiology podcast. I am your host, Elka Kubaku, licensed social worker and psychotherapist. In this podcast, we explore divisive issues around food, health, and body image with the goal of mending relationships within the eating disorder recovery professional community and creating a space where a multiplicity of perspectives can coexist harmoniously. This podcast is uncensored and encompasses the political and ideological spectrum. If you believe something you hear is harmful or misinformed, please be respectful to the speaker. And also, feel free to reach out about recording another episode on the same topic from your vantage point. My hope is that if, as professionals, we can hold each other's stories with respect and compassion, we'll be better able to do so for our clients. What is an eating disorder? We know it can involve symptoms such as food restriction, binge eating, or purging behaviors. But what underlies these behaviors? What causes an eating disorder, and how do we treat it? These are questions that do not have a universal, clear-cut answer. Is an eating disorder a coping strategy developed in response to trauma, an attempt for control, a cry for help, a response to societal pressures, or a biological susceptibility triggered by food restriction? Is an eating disorder about food and body image, or some deeper biopsychosocial dynamic? How we answer these questions determines the type of treatment we provide. In this episode, Rachel Lewis-Marlow discusses her work in eating disorder recovery using a comprehensive approach that includes trauma-informed, attachment-based, and somatically integrated methods. We break down what each of these mean and how they relate to eating disorder etiology and treatment. Rachel shares how attachment in her personal relationships impacted her ability or inability to eat at various periods in her life. She also discusses powerful moments of connection and co-regulation she's seen as a clinician. From Rachel's perspective, an eating disorder is a form of communication to listen to rather than a pathology to erase. Recovery, then, is an additive process focused on building a client's resources and support rather than an eliminative process aimed at removing behaviors. Rachel is the co-founder and director of the Embodied Recovery Institute. She is a somatically integrative psychotherapist, dually licensed in counseling and therapeutic massage and bodywork. She is a certified advanced practitioner in sensory motor psychotherapy and has advanced training and 25 plus years of experience in diverse somatic therapies, including craniosacral therapy, energetic osteopathy, oncology massage, and aromatherapy. Rachel began her work in eating disorders in residential PHP and IOP treatment programs. There, she developed the Embodied Recovery Group Therapy Protocol, which forms the basis for the Embodied Recovery for Eating Disorders, ERED, treatment model. She provided program development, training, and supervision for the implementation of this model to enhance the effectiveness of current best practices, such as DBT, interpersonal process, and ACT groups. She also developed the Body Wisdom Group Protocol, an alternative to the traditional body image group, which focuses on enhancing the mind-body relationship through mindful experience of and through the body. She has extensive experience as a teacher and presenter, focusing on accessing the body's unique capacity to give voice to the subconscious and to lay the foundation for healing and maintaining psychological and physical health. In her private practice in Chapel Hill, NC, Rachel specializes in working with people exploring recovery from trauma, eating disorders, and dissociative disorders. Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here.
Can you start by telling me a little bit about the work that you do in the eating disorder recovery space?
Yeah. So in addition to seeing clients, although I would say that my private practice is not just eating disorders, what I have is a training program that we offer to anybody who's on a multidisciplinary treatment team working with eating disorders. And so that can include anybody from your therapists and dietitians to nurses and psychiatrists to program frontline staff, program directors, and also people who might be seen as sort of adjuncts, like yoga therapists or occupational therapists, other kinds of somatic therapists, art therapists, etc. And it is a training on an approach to working with eating disorders that is a very comprehensive lens that looks at the impact of our defense system, our attachment system, and our sensory processing system on our somatic organization, our neurological regulation, that impacts our capacity to engage with food as a source of nourishment. So we're really looking at, and it's a trauma-informed, attachment-based, and somatically integrative way of working with eating disorder and supporting eating disorder recovery.
Can you give examples or define each of those three: trauma-informed, somatically integrated, and attachment-based? Yes.
Right.
And give an example of what that might look like.
Sure. So, I'm trying to think of which one to start with. I think what I'll start with is actually the attachment piece. And the reason I want to start with that is that as mammals, and human beings are mammals, our nervous system is organized to link our ability to recognize safety and safe attachment and our capacity to take in food. Because as mammals, if we don't have a relationship with a source of nourishment, we have to have that safe relationship, or we aren't going to survive, right? We have to be able to know, are we being held by a human being that is a source of nourishment, or a log, because we're mammals. And so there is a way that our nervous system organizes such that if our attachment system, that social engagement system that Steve Porges talks about, if our social engagement system isn't perceiving something safe that we can connect to, our digestive system isn't going to organize in a way that says, oh, let me take in nourishment.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me an example of how you've seen that play out, either in your personal life or with clients?
Sure. I'll talk about my own life, because these are the places from which I integrated a lot of these different maps and models that make up the embodied recovery for eating disorder approach. After my father died, right, where I had a real loss of attachment, and I needed an overwhelming sense of grief. Mm-hmm. I couldn't eat, right? My appetite just went away. And even to the point where there were times when I would find myself dry heaving, my whole body just was disorganized relative to the ingestion process and the digestion process. I just lost my appetite completely. So that's a pretty extreme example, right? When I just felt really detached and unconnected. And as opposed to, I'm trying to think of how to say, last summer, I spent some time visiting my sister, and it was just this really lovely sense of connectedness and feeling at ease and welcome and enjoying my meals, and cooking together. So those are sort of two ways of seeing what connectedness can impact. Versus being in a school cafeteria, right, and having my meal and not knowing where to sit down, and not feeling like, oh, there's a place where I can sit down, and how that interrupts or impacts my relationship with the food I'm about to eat.
Yeah.
Do I feel it, or do I, eat it?
Yeah. So you've seen a really clear relationship in your own life between how I'm feeling in relationship with the people around me, or in the case of your father, with the experience of loss, and how my body is able to digest and take in food.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And it's not only in the ingestion and digestion phase of in relationship with food. One of the maps that we use in this approach is it's a behavioral map that I was introduced to through sensory motor psychotherapy and pathology's work, and she, I think, got it from Ron Kurtz, called the action cycle, and it's really saying that, it's articulating that there are many phases to a behavior. And so the behavior of eating is not just the ingestion and digestion process. It's also the clarity of, am I hungry or not, right? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I anxious? What are the internal signals that I'm feeling? And can I hear them clearly and discern what they are? And then there's the process of, can I respond to those signals? Do I have the capacity to, select food and prepare food, and, then can I ingest it, and then can I digest it, and then can I eliminate it? So it's looking at the behavior from all of these different places, and that our attachment system can impact all of those different stages of behavior. Definitely. Did that answer that question?
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense to me. The question that I'm having, and maybe we can get to this after, I know there are still a couple of more important components to what you were starting to describe in treatment, but we know that the theory or perspective that we have on what is underneath an eating disorder influences how we then treat the eating disorder. So what you're describing to me is that our connectedness, attachment influences our ability to, at every phase of taking in and digesting food, feels a lot different than, let's say, the perspective that someone with anorexia, when they go on a diet, something in their nervous system just takes that food restriction and can't stop it. So I want to understand a little bit more about how this perspective shows up in treatment, how you see it in clients, and how it then influences the approach you take to therapy. And maybe before that, we can talk about the other two components of it and then come back.
Well, it might be helpful because I think it'll come into play.
Yeah.
And so then I'm going to talk about the sensory process, or the somatically integrated, right? Which is really emphasizing the bottom-up process of our well-being, right? And impacting that, meaning that what's happening on a body level, on a physiological level, impacts our experience, our emotional experiences, and the cognition that we're able to hold and that feel congruent with our experience. And that when we really understand the importance of the bottom up process, what we are listening to then is, what is the state of regulation in the nervous system? What is the organization of the body relative to being available for all of those parts of the eating process, right? And that our eating disorder behaviors are a result or an expression of our somatic state, of our physiological state, not necessarily the result of a thought we're having. The thoughts we're having are often the ones that we have available to match the behavior, the behavioral expression, right? And it's what's available. but it's not really speaking to the underlying physiology. And if what we're trying to do is to just either eliminate the behaviors that are congruent with a physiological state, but we're changing the physiological state, then we're asking somebody to dissociate in order to behave in a way that we're finding more socially acceptable. And that, I think, is it's not sustainable. That's one of the reasons why a lot of times there are these relapses, right? And people can sustain that behavior change that is going against the grain of their physiology for a little while, but it requires a lot of energy to do it, or a lot of external motivation that isn't sustainable.
Yeah, that's what often happens when people go to residential and are pushed to eat in order to get out of there and then leave and find themselves
right
back where they started.
Right. And there's this emphasis on separating from the eating disorder voice and the eating, it's like, how do you not listen to those things and do this other thing, as opposed to saying, oh, wait, what if we actually really listen? And listen not just to what the thoughts are, but to what is the body saying? Where in that action cycle is the dysregulation starting to happen? Right? And what is missing? This is where we get to this idea of it being recovery is an additive process, is what to bring in that is going to help the physiology experience a state of regulation and is more congruent with being able to get accurate signals internally, respond to those signals, and be able to identify sources of nourishment versus sources of toxicity. And one of the things that often happens is if we experience a lot of conditionality of relationship, right? Like, I'm only going to be able to connect, to attach under certain conditions, then if that, then we're going to find that those rules are reflected in our relationship with food, not just in our relationship with people or social institutions, right? Like, our attachment figures can be anything from, a biological attachment figure of a parent, or even like a prenatal environment, right? Or a parent, or a peer group, or a faith community, or, a political institution, right? Anything that is sort of the gatekeeper to our access to resources. And if there's this well, I can only get access to those resources that I vitally need to survive, as long as I am not too emotional, or am only happy, or I only look, I only take up this much space, or I only ask for what somebody else wants me to have. There's all of these places that we start to learn these rules of how we're allowed to be in the world. And that if we have to violate those rules, we get anxious. And when we're anxious, or when, our nervous system is in a safe state of safety, we don't have an bottom-up support for ingestion, digestion, absorption, elimination.
So let me see if I'm understanding you. When you talk about the somatic state, or just the state of the body, that's sort of the overall how we're feeling, almost at a gut level. And that somatic sense is connected to attachment, and whether the relationships we have and can depend on are unconditional or feel like they're dependent on.
Yeah, I think whether they're supportive, unconditional, or what the conditions are. I mean, I will say, like, it is hard. Not every relationship is going to be totally unconditional, but there is that sense of, there's enough. There's enough acceptance. Enough of who I am that I can experience a sense of belonging in the world. You know, I can experience those places that are safe places.
Yeah. Would you say that, let's say, somebody who's been shamed for their body, or like somebody who doesn't sort of fit into whatever societal ideals, and then feels like they have to restrict or cut back because of that, would that be an expression of this, where it's like, my degree of acceptance is dependent on the shape of my body or the way I look?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That my self-worth is somehow attached to my appearance or my performance, you know, and that my sense of belonging in community is highly conditional. So then there's always, even if I meet those conditions, even if I meet those criteria, there can still be a sense of dis-ease because I know it's conditional, and I know I have to maintain that. There's no guarantee that I can, you know, and it's a sense of like, oh, wait, are you only going to accept me? And so when inclusion, we're kind of getting off on a, you know, we're kind of going, you know, a tangent, but I think it's important is that because we're social animals and we're mammals and we need relationship in order to survive, if I don't have a sense of belonging in community, I have to have a sense of inclusion. And inclusion is by definition conditional. But if I know I belong, I don't have to be included everywhere. Right?
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
You know I belong with my group of friends. If I'm not included in, you know, a conversation or a lunch, it's okay. It's all right for, you know, my friends who quilt to go and do that quilting together. I'm fine with that. It's not a threat to my survival. It doesn't dysregulate me, or it's not a reflection on my own self-worth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking about, as you're talking too, I'm recovered from an eating disorder, and like a period in my life where I want to say I was in a lot of ways alone, and I had people who care about me. I come from a big family, but I can feel that sort of like almost like the aloneness, that it just feels like so central. And alongside that, I had so much fear of like somebody didn't respond to me or things like that. Whereas when I contrast it with now, where I'm married, I have a spouse who and I have kids, and it feels like a basic sense of like, these are the people that I'm in every part of life with. And a lot of the just a little interactions day to day don't matter as much, or I'm less afraid of them, or I might be upset by it if I feel rejected by someone or whatever, but it doesn't have that same gut level threat.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing your own experience of that, right? And bringing that into a really felt sense. I also want to include that sometimes that physical sense of belonging comes from a somatic experience, a very physical experience that can be impacted by all kinds of things that are not related necessarily to a social intent, right? You know, sometimes it's held in our sensory processing system, right? Or our just our physical development, right? That you know, people sometimes experiencing, and this is where we can get into the impact of trauma, right? That when the body is holding an experience of threat, right? and it hasn't been able to return to a state of safety for, whatever reason, then it's going to be hard to, even if I know these people love me, but I'm not feeling it because my body is still in a defensive posture, which is, like our defense system is what separates us from things. Our attachment system is what connects us. And trauma, when we are feeling trauma, or the impacts of long-lasting trauma, it is as much that we haven't been able to return to a place of connectedness. And we're still holding whatever we did to separate from danger. Whether it is held in a mobilized defense of, fight, flight, or, kind of a high freeze, or, an immobilized, which is, the high freeze is also immobilized, or the dorsal state. So again, that's why I think about it from an additive process. It's about, how do we add the capacity to connect to safety? And for different people and how they're wired, different things are going to be perceived as safe or not. So for somebody who's highly energetically sensitive, and going to the grocery store could be just like total sensory overwhelm and overload. And, and so if we aren't attending to the particulars of somebody's nervous system, it's like people who maybe have unintegrated early reflexes and have difficulty crossing the midline, right? So this is just a physical wiring that can be impacted by all kinds of different things. But if when I have to bring my hands to the midline, my nervous system gets dysregulated, right? Then things that require that movement very quickly, very subcortically, I'm going to feel I don't want to do it, an avoidance of that. So
what's the movement of hands to the midline?
Just bringing, like, anything that would require your hands to come to the center line of your body. Things like cutting food or opening a cabinet and reaching in to it.
Wait, and what's the difficulty with that? What's that related to, or where does that?
Some people have a hard time coming to midline, and that can be a result of early primitive reflexes not being integrated, right? Even things like people who maybe had challenges suckling, right? So the suckling reflex and that movement helps to organize us to midline, helps orient our binocular vision. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that is integrated. And if for any reason that wasn't really brought online, then when it comes time to engage in volitional movement, not reflexive movement, volitional movement, I have to override a reflexive pattern that doesn't bring me into midline. Which is I have to work much harder and override something that's I've got to move against the current. I don't get the support of the reflexes that bring me into midline.
Yeah. So attachment is the central theme. We need to be in relationship to people we feel safe. Trauma, safety, danger, those are things that impact our ability to connect with another person.
With another person, and sometimes with ourselves.
And with ourselves. And those are all held in our body. Let's move to the question of what does this all look like as tangible?
Right. And yeah. So I think the thing that one way to think about this approach is that what we're doing is we are combining behavioral maps and somatic. And so, as I mentioned, there is this behavioral map of the action cycle that takes a behavior that we might think of as one behavior, like restriction or binging or purging. And it says, okay, what's actually going on at each of these stages of the action cycle? When does the impulse to restrict come in? Is it when I don't know if I'm hungry or not, or I don't know what I want, or I'm feeling something, but I can't tell it. I think that that's fear and it's actually hunger, or, it's like if I think that feeling is fear, I'm not gonna gravitate towards food, right? So the first stage, or what I'm going to say, if it's the first, one way to begin is to sort of look at this single behavior and say, okay, where in the action cycle is this happening? Right? When do those thoughts come in? Which is, again, listening to them, not just saying, don't listen to them. It's like, no, let's listen to them. When are they coming in? What are they coming in response to? Okay. And then it's looking at, okay, what is the somatic organization that goes with that particular stage of the action cycle? What do we need to be able to do? Or what is the organization of the body and the nervous system and the movement system, which reflects our attachment and our defense system, is all in movement. What corresponds with that particular stage of the action cycle? So, if at that part of the action cycle, which is about selecting food, choosing something from a menu, speaking it out loud, preparing food, going to the grocery store to get it, there's all of these ways of moving towards something, which goes with particular state of the nervous system, and also movement that we need to be able to embody in order to engage effectively with that part of the action cycle. So you go, okay, what's happening in the body when you attempt to do that? And how can we build your capacity? That from the bottom up. How do we increase regulation before we ask you to do an action? Instead of, how do we get you to do that action and tolerate the distress of not having capacity to do it, not having the bottom up support?
Okay, so if let's say I'm working with someone who their primary thing is food restriction, when we're looking at did you call it the behavior? What was the name for it?
Behavioral map?
Behavioral map. So we might be looking at, is it the time when you're preparing food, the moment when you're about to put it in your mouth, after eating it, when does that discomfort, or when does it feel like you get stuck? And then in the somatic map, we'd be looking at what's happening in your body in that moment when you get stuck. So that might be like, I feel tension, I feel frozen, I just can't bring myself to move, I feel nauseous.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And so this is, I'm trying to see, I want to get a little bit more specific so that we can really see it, because there is, so there's the action cycle, which is the behavioral map. And then there's something that we call, it's the relational cycle of movement, which is the somatic map that works with our attachment and our defense system, but also our sensory motor system, right? So all of those three parts can be described in these movements. So, for example, let's say I can sense that I'm hungry and I love preparing food. I can do it, but it's I can't actually take it in, right? And so I'm looking at, in some ways, we're talking about, okay, what is the grasp? Like I can actually, it's there. I can connect with it. I can connect with this thing that's outside of me that I know is a resource. I can connect. It's a grasp, and I can pull it and I can bring it to me. It's like, okay, something is getting in the way there. Like, can I really take it in? Am I allowed to have what I want? And feel that in the body. It's like, okay, well, what is getting in the way of actually just that movement of, oh, I can hold this and then I can bring it in. And there can be all kinds of things that are getting in the way of that aren't supporting it. And I don't want to get into too many details, but, we kind of look at, well, what's on either side? What happens before the grasp, which is a reach, right? Like, so have I actually prepared what I want, or have I prepared what I think other people want me to have? Like, I know I'm hungry, but I'm supposed to eat this. And I know how to get the thing I'm supposed to eat, but it's not really what I want. Or it is what I want, but I'm not allowed to let anybody else see that I'm actually taking and getting it. Yeah. And so what we might do is to see, well, and this is another place where coming to the midline might be hard, right? It's like, I can want it, but it's got to be over to the side. What happens? And, if we take this thing that you want, whatever it is, and we just move it from being over on your right a little bit more to being right in front of you. And sometimes what you can see is that it's like, I can be in relationship with it as long as it's over there, kind of in the side, and I can kind of sneak it over. No one's really seeing. But as soon as I bring it more directly in front of me, I get really nervous. And so we might say, okay, let's stay right there, right at the edge of that, and see what happens if we bring something else in. What happens if you push down into the ground and you get a little bit more? What happens if you feel support from behind? How does that change how you orient to what's right in front? If right, that it's right there. What happens if you get different kinds of sensory input? Right? What happens if sometimes I was working with somebody and we were working with literally, what happens if you give a little bit of tactile input just to this place below your lip, right? By your chin, right? And just hold it there. And what we're doing there is we're actually helping those echoes of the rooting reflex to unlock and bring you, that thing that I want and need, it comes right to me. It's right here. It's okay. And we see how those things build your capacity to engage on a more gross motor or more volitional or more complex social level.
Yes, it's making sense. So when we talk about adding something in, is that like, what can we add that allows you to feel safe taking this in or moving through this part of the experiment?
I love that question. And one of the reasons I love it is that I think when we do work in this way, and through this approach and through other somatic approaches, the thing that we're adding is co-regulation. And so as providers, what we're adding is ourselves first. And that's really important because a lot of treatments and approaches are emphasizing people's ability to self-regulate or to access these tools for regulation.
Yeah.
And the thing is that in order for me to do that, I have to have a certain amount of regulation on board for me to be able to think, this is the tool I need, or this is the skill I need. And my ability to self-regulate is built on a foundation of experience of regulation that is first brought about through co-regulation. We come into the world with an ability to regulate absolutely nothing. In our body, we can't regulate our body temperature, our bowels, our emotions. That's And we need co-regulated attachment figures to help us build that experience of being in a regulated state. So we even know what we're trying to find in our own when we have the capacity for volitional and autonomous action.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're adding are experiences of co-regulation.
Mm-hmm. So the central message then of whatever this particular thing that we're adding is that I'm here with you and I can stay with you. And whatever you're experiencing in this moment, I'm with you in it.
Yes. Yes. And I'm not requiring that you stop doing what you're doing in order for me to be here with you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm not afraid of your fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because people who are not engaging with food as a source of nourishment, their nervous system is in an organization of fear, either because they can't get away from something dangerous or they can't connect to something safe.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another sort of little message that we say is you can't scare somebody out of being in a state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's helpful if someone can be in the presence of someone who's not afraid of their fear.
Yeah.
So that there's the possibility of finding something else to land on.
Mm-hmm.
And co-regulate with.
Yeah.
And whether that is a tree, a dog, a song, a spiritual belief that's truly regulating, not just bypassing and avoiding, but helping me stay with myself in a situation, right? And be more fully engaged and embodied. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I have a basic understanding of your approach now, which makes me want to go a little bit more into the story that has led you here. I remember the last time we spoke, you had mentioned that you had started bringing this into a treatment center that I'd asked you to. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that fit into the treatment center and how that, because I'm just picturing, and I had done my internship at a PHP IOP program, and so much of higher levels of care tend to be focused on, and largely because of the immediacy of what people are coming in with, like, let's get you to a place where you're physically safe, where you're not in danger of having to be hospitalized because of malnourishment or whatever. So can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like in your first experience of using this in an eating disorder treatment center?
Absolutely. I want to start by naming that when I was doing it, I think it was sort of at the end of what seemed like a golden era in treatment, where people were allowed to stay in treatment for longer with that weight. And so there was the possibility of actually helping to build somebody's attachment system. There was and that changed. The other thing I want to name, the person who was the clinical director of the treatment center, the executive director at the treatment center that I was in at the time was a clinician, and she did an amazing job of shielding us from the corporate interests. Okay. So I felt that there was a lot of permission for me to kind of offer things. And so one of the things that it started with, honestly, was how I it was, if I want to talk about it in terms of groups. We made a little shift in how we began our interpersonal process group. And I came up with this little acronym that was, show up, own your stuff, ask for what you need, and respect the process. And it started with the showing up part, like how much of you is in the room? Can you even acknowledge, yeah, only 25% of me is here. Well, of course, only 25% of you is here because you've got mindfulness snack next, or you don't know if insurance is going to cut out, or, whatever. It's like, oh, so something is telling you that, something lets you know. Right. So, notice what lets you know that 25% of you is here. And can that 5% that's here be 100% here? Notice how you're orienting to the room. So there was a little bit more time of let's arrive before we go somewhere. And how does your body letting you know where you are and what you're orienting to? And what happens if we take some time to really orient to pushing into the ground a little bit? And then notice how our breath shifts, So I was able to bring that in. And then also one of the things that we shifted was, at least, for a little bit of times, body image group. Oh my God. Body image group. Totally understandable. And so, I developed something that was, rather than thinking about body image, we started to play with body wisdom. And how do you start to honor how your body communicates and what it's communicating, so that we're learning the language of our physiology, and we're recognizing that, wow, it really can tell the difference between someone who's really there and someone who's not. And then I was also able to build a group that looked at these different attachment movements and cognitions that go with how we're in our bodies. So that was part of it. Now, and how much of it there was, for a while, there was a will to build a program that was really based on this. And then that kind of dwindled. And my experience at this point has been, unfortunately, that the corporate will to implement a program that really, because here's the thing, is that you've got to really support your frontline staff and your staff. Yeah. Because they're the ones who have to be co-regulating for the client. And if they aren't being co-regulated, then they can't do that. Yeah. And if it's all about, we've got to get people to an ideal, what is the BMI? What is, are they completing their meal plan? And then they're, out the door. And so much of the field of treating eating disorders is based on fear. Insurance companies are fear-based. And unfortunately, in a lot of corporate treatment, the treatment isn't the product that's being sold to clients. Clients are the product that is being sold to shareholders. And that's kind of messed up. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's the case. And the people who are on the front lines, who are they are the ones who are like the medicine. They are the potential co-regulators. They are thrown in there without any real training on what is co-regulation and how do you do that, and
even the space to do that with yourself, because treatment centers are so fast paced and there's so much going on constantly.
And from a sensory processing and trauma lens, those eating environments, you've got all of the noise, and you've got, and the person next to you is not regulated, and you're not regulated, and yet you're supposed to somehow pretend that you are. I mean, it's, and then you've got, somebody who is supposed to somehow be the food police and the co-regulator, and then It's really, really hard.
Yeah. If I were to set aside the logistical, insurance, corporate concerns and move back to what this ideal treatment center would look like, can you describe some of that to me?
Sure. Well, I think it would start with a real in the intake of understanding, what is this person's, how is this person's sensory motor system organized? What kinds of sensory input are regulating and what are dysregulating? We would start with that. It would, and it would offer sensory input that helps to build regulation. Right? And for some people, that's going to be a certain quality of movement. For some people, that's going to be a weighted lap pad. For some people, it's going to be, different kinds of sounds or smells that they can have access to, because those things are co-regulators in a sense. They are things outside of me that I become in contact with that helps impact my state of regulation. And it would understand that we have to nourish the body through our senses and our relationships, sometimes in order for the body to get nourishment from food. So it would begin in the assessment. It would be trauma-informed, meaning that it would understand how does this person identify something as either safe or dangerous? Where are their sources of safety? Right? And what challenges their ability to orient to safety? It would be very attachment based. Am I answering your question, or am I getting too obtuse again?
Yeah. So what I hear is you'd spend a lot more time getting to know the person, and more specifically, getting to know where is their sense of safety, getting a deeper sense for that map you described. Where is the disruption happening?
Yes, and thinking about it from an action cycle perspective, because for some people, if they really aren't getting accurate internal signals, and that's coming from experiences that maybe had really early in their life that impacted how their central nervous system and peripheral nervous system are organized, then the interventions that they're going to need to build capacity may be nonverbal. They may be somatic. They may be certain kinds of hands-on or occupational therapy interventions to build that capacity, which might be really different than somebody where they're more able to engage in a somatic and cognitive mode. Right? And access their somatic experience more verbally.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to bring in a few different things that I've encountered in myself working with people or speaking to people that come from a different sort of theoretical framework. And I want to understand sort of how you relate to those things. So, I mean, one of them is just a practical concern. So aside from like the insurance and logistical challenges, oftentimes there's also the urgency created by medical risk.
Yes.
How do you navigate that when it's like somebody, let's say, especially when somebody has like significant internal, maybe trauma based things that are holding them back from taking in enough nourishment? And those things can take time to heal. They can take time to heal. And also that healing can be inhibited by the physical state of their body, just like with the state of essentially starvation. So how do you navigate that, both the immediacy of the risk and also the effect that physical malnourishment has on the capacity to do sometimes deeper healing work?
So I think, yes, there are times when someone just, they need nourishment, right? And a feeding tube and G tube is what's necessary because they can't engage in those very complex behaviors that go taking in nourishment from food. which is a very, very complex behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing is that pairing the growing of the body through nourishment with the attending to what it is to inhabit a body. And recognizing that, yes, one of the things I say is like, this works really well as long as someone's alive. It's harder to work with dead people. We work with them indifferently. Let's just put it that way.
Very true. Yeah.
But, there's also a lot of territory between they're staying alive and they're ready to inhabit a body that I have deemed a healthy size and shape. And if I'm just getting the body there, but I haven't helped them inhabit it, that is a violence that I am putting upon them. And there's lots of ways to help somebody to inhabit the body that they're growing.
Yeah.
And that's where the embodiment piece of this comes in, is like really working on what is the process of embodiment. And how do we facilitate a process of embodiment all along the way?
Yeah. So there might be space for when there's like real immediate medical risk for doing something that keeps someone alive that maybe doesn't feel gentle, kind, and entirely in touch. But alongside that, you're also doing the work of helping them inhabit their body and keeping that as the larger vision once they have basic medical stabilization, even if it's not like full of health.
Yeah. And how we work with the attachment system during all of that. And we know this from something just like surgery, right? Which is not related to an eating disorder, is that like people feel the impact of the bedside manner of the surgeon and the anesthesiologist and the nursing before and after, and the person who is doing the transport. All of that has an impact on how the body receives the intervention and recovers from it. And if we aren't attending to that, we may be shifting the body, but we are not healing the person.
Yeah, it's really traumatizing or disconnecting the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that I hear a lot, and I've seen this to some degree, and this is sort of the underpinnings of family-based treatment, is that it does seem that for some people, dieting is the trigger that sets off this full cycle. And when they're supported to adequately nourish themselves, the urge to restrict starts to dissipate as a direct result of that. I'm curious what you've seen with that. And because family-based treatment feels very different from what you're describing, in the sense that the number one and first goal really is to be with this person, and like the parent or family takes responsibility for this person feeding themselves, knowing that it's going to be anxiety provoking in the beginning. And I've heard from people who've seen that that started to shift the internal things. I'm curious how you conceptualize that, to what extent you've seen that or haven't.
So, I think people have really different experiences with family-based treatment, and so much of it depends on how is the family being supported?
Yeah.
And what are the needs of the kid? Because sometimes, especially if you have a child for whom that decision-making process is part of what is creating the anxiety, having somebody take over the decision-making process or the food preparation process, if those are the parts of the action cycle that are really hard, then having that attended to helps the person engage with food in a way that can build capacity. And then, capacity is built and you're going around the cycle again, right?
Yeah.
And that's helpful. And also depends on, how terrified are the family? What is the family dynamic? And so for some people, family-based therapy doesn't work because the family dynamics haven't been addressed and the family's not being supported, and it's just taking away autonomy. And that, then someone can be kind of compliant, but they aren't really healing. So I think it fits very much because we're working with the attachment system. And so it really depends on how the attachment system is structured and is it the developmental needs of the child.
Yeah.
Or not. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I recently recorded an episode. We haven't published it with someone else talking about family-based treatment. And they were talking a lot about like supporting the family and making the family that solid base, which it seems to me is a very common misunderstanding that comes in and that pits family-based treatment against your approach, even though as you're describing it now, they can be very much aligned. Where
absolutely
helping the family be the co-regulator is this solid system.
Absolutely. But, sometimes I've heard like family-based treatment it's all about like, they've got to, you've got to get your kid to eat these things, it's all about meal plan completion, and it's not looking at regulation, and it's not looking about like, what is getting in the way for this kid and how do you support them and how do you build the attachment system,
Yeah.
It's not all about just, are they following the rules or, and how are we supporting the parents' fear? Because they're
yeah.
And they need somebody to help them with their art.
Alongside that, what would you say is your relationship in like this program or way of working with it that you're describing with discomfort? Because when I think about family-based treatment or some other treatments as well, there's an acknowledgement that at some points this process is painful, and the goal is that I can hold you through that. I can be here with you. I can be like a solid rock with you in that. And while you're describing, to what extent is there a space for that maybe some of this is uncomfortable, or is it more like working to alleviate that? What does that look like?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Like, so how do we respond when someone is feeling discomfort?
Or I want to say, I guess I'm trying to formulate almost like what is the expectation around discomfort? Like to what extent is sort of the way that I'm hearing this approach, it feels like in an ideal world, almost the expectation that I feel coming from it is like, oh, this is going to be like mostly soft, gentle, comfortable, which I imagine is probably not how it plays out.
Not always. It really depends on the person and the provider. And I think what I would say is that the expectation is to be curious about it. It's like, oh, so yeah, that's really uncomfortable. Huh. How interesting. Can we stay right there with that part of you that's feeling uncomfortable? Right? So you focus not just on the discomfort or keeping going in spite of the discomfort, but what about what's letting you know it's uncomfortable? What kind of discomfort is it? Is it angry discomfort? Is it scared? Is it a sad discomfort? Is it a physical discomfort? Is it burning discomfort? Is it a pressure? Is it, like getting as curious about it, and then about the part of you that is experiencing that discomfort. So, even like, oh, no, that it's a tightness in I feel nauseous. Oh, okay. Well, what kind of nauseous? Is it a nauseous above your diaphragm? Is it an upper or is it a lower nauseous? Is it the nauseous that goes with like, a bottomless pit? Is it a full nauseous? So we just get curious about it. And we go and we listen to it, and we listen to the part of the self that is expressing something through the body, because the body will speak the things that aren't allowed to be spoken in words.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And it also answers a couple of other, I think, where sort of, it feels like every approach has the approach and then the maybe dysfunctional offshoots of it, or ways that it gets distorted. And
Absolutely.
I feel like when we talk about deeper work or understanding what's underneath the eating disorder, oftentimes that gets taken to a like, can we figure out like what's causing this? And it almost becomes this whole analytical process, which takes you further out of your body. And what you're describing, or the other offshoot, which is what I was touching on before, is like it's expected almost like something like a flip is going to switch. Like if I could just find the answer, it'll all change. And what you're describing is there's space to hold discomfort, not to push through it but to stay with it and let it be here and let the feeling itself speak.
Exactly. Exactly. And I would say that that even goes to, the behaviors themselves. That it's like, oh, we're all uncomfortable with this behavior. How about rather than ask this person to change so that we aren't uncomfortable? What happens if we go, okay, I'm scared about this. Okay, that's my fear. How do I stay with this person enough to listen to what their body is trying to communicate that hasn't found its way into words yet?
Yeah.
And so that, we aren't just trying to make it all better or things to go away. We're being able to stay engaged and in a way that allows for people to return to a state of regulation, to return to a state of safe attachment, or discover it for the first time.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, or can we wrap up with a story? Like, and obviously not like one person's story, but sort of a like something in your work that is like, like this is meaningful, this is impactful, maybe a moment in time or a type of experience that you've had working with people, that lets you know this is what feels right, this is the way to go.
Well, I guess what I want to say is, I think this is the way to go for some people at some points. Like you were saying, like there's no one answer.
Yeah.
It's not, this is, sometimes people go, oh, this is the missing piece. I'm like, no, it's not it may be a missing piece. And so I really want to hold the spaciousness of that. For me, it's an essential piece. It's not the only thing that's essential. But what has told me that? So I'm going to give a really, this may be more of a simple moment. But I think it helps. It was in a group, and it must have been an interpersonal process group or something like that. And so I was talking about this, kind of feeling alone. I can't remember exactly the context, but I remember saying something or reflecting back about, it's like, you don't feel like there's anybody on your side. She said something like, what do you mean? Like, there's no one, like, I don't know what that means, like to have someone on my side or whatever. And I said, it's okay if I just come over and sit next to you. And I just sat next to her.
Wow.
And I said, what if you just push your arm into mine? And it's like, yeah. And so just see what happens in your body. It's like, it's like I'm on your side. And our whole body shifted. And then her orientation to the group, and what is it? I said, okay, and what is it to look around the room now when you know that there's someone on your side? And it was like she could hear what people were saying and reflecting back there. She could take it in.
Yeah.
She could take in her environment, right? And so that's what I'm talking about in terms of like the dynamics of of how we relate to sources of nourishment, whether they're from food or from social environments or just sensory environments. Oh, could she actually take it in? Felt someone was on her side, and felt it.
Yeah, that feels really powerful.
Yeah, and it was so simple.
Mm-hmm.
But it also required that I felt comfortable and confident enough
Mm-hmm.
to bring myself and as something for her to experience
Yep.
in a way that I know wasn't going to violate boundaries, but
Mm-hmm.
actually establish boundaries, boundaries that allow us to connect.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're so welcome. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to have a great conversation with you.
Yeah.